Hello, one and all. I'm happy to introduce myself for this series of lectures on the plays of Shakespeare. My name is David Gamble. I'm a retired teacher of some 50 years in the classroom in the Ontario, Canada school system, high school. One of my greatest pleasures in the profession was the teaching of Shakespeare. I could do it all year. And also putting on after school with the drama club some of the plays. It was all fun and a great learning experience, and I miss it. My target audiences for these lectures are four. Very briefly, the first is the probably senior high school students who are wrestling with some of the more complex plays, the deeper plays, and helping them with their homework. My second group that I'm targeting is the perhaps first year university students who have more serious and deeper essays and such to deal with and to produce for their professors. My third would be the beginning teacher. I do remember how daunting it was to have six classes in those days with sometimes it was baby boom 30 kids in each class. That was 180 a year. And if I can help cut short some of that prep time for some of these new teachers or any teacher, I hope my purpose has been served. And fourth, to the playgoer. I do sometimes lectures in a condo where I live with the upcoming Shakespeare offerings from around the area, and I hope I can enhance the price of the ticket, which aren't cheap anymore. So those are my four. But of course, all playgoers are welcome to join and take what they can from these presentations. So please come on aboard, one and all. So Shakespeare's Cymbeline. Shakespeare's Cymbeline is a rather zany and complex play. The plot borders on the absurd. I would say it almost gets to the point of burlesque. It is essentially a melodrama taken to extremes. It is history, it is romance, it is tragedy almost, and it is, I think, satirical at times and comprise a lot of the elements of many of the Shakespeare plays, which we'll talk about later. It is, as I would say, over the top. It's melodrama that starts in Britain shortly after the birth of Christ. It is probably in the latter days of Augustus or the early days of Tiberius. He writes this and it fits very well with James I, as he's writing this in 1609, 1610, some 6, 7 years into James I's reign. James I was very concerned, of course, being James VI and James I, both of Scotland and England, in very concerned in of national unity and bringing the two countries together. So this play, Shakespeare, of course, knows who he's playing to, goes back to the early Britons around the time of Christ to give a sense of the nation. Feudalism is dying out, nationalism is rising, religions have divided countries, languages are divided countries, and England has lost most of its French territories by I'd say, the middle of the 1400s under Henry VI. It still has Calais. Uh, Calais is the last to be lost in 1558 under the reign of Mary I. So countries are defining their culture and their places in the world in Europe. Of course, the imperialism has begun, and James I is consolidating, if you will, and Shakespeare reflects that by going back into the roots of England. So. The queen, by the way, Cymbeline, the king, has a queen who is simply referred to as queen. She doesn't have a name. And in that speech, I think Shakespeare knew what he was doing, she gives a very, very patriotic speech about the wonderful England, and it's very, very close to John of Gaunt's Sceptred Isle speech in Richard II. So you have those elements of nationhood in this play. And you'll see how the major plot works out to support that. The Historically, we're in pre-Roman Britain, somewhere in the early days of the Common Era. The Romans have got to pay a tax to sorry, the Britons pay a tax to the Romans. They're collecting a tribute, if you will. It's an extortion racket. That's the nature of imperialism, I guess, but I don't want to get too political. Um, Later on, the Anglo-Saxons had to pay one to the Danes to stop their raiding in northern England, and it was called Danegeld. So this is not strange to the Britons and to the English. It is historical. So we're bringing in those historical elements into the play and to creating the central main plot. The Queen, who has great designs on the queenship herself, she wants the king, her husband, and she's not the first wife. She has no children with him. She brings along a child named Cloten. More on him later. Uh, but the queen is sort of the sample of this nationalism. In her speech, when you see the play, you'll and read the play, you'll see what I mean. Um, so we have this growing national unity, which is reflected in the writing of Shakespeare. It's satisfying, of course. He knows on which side his bread is buttered, and he picks up some of the themes which would be very satisfactory to the reigning king. Um, So Cymbeline is going to refuse, certainly at his wife's request, to pay the tribute, and this creates all kinds of problems because the Romans are going to come and get it. So you will either pay or we do bad things to you. Um, that is for the opening of the play and the conclusion of the play. In the meantime, we have the melodrama. Um, in that melodrama, the central figure is the queen's only heir, apparently, he thinks, surprises later, is the only heir he has is one daughter, Imogen. She has fallen in love with a commoner that is very highly respected. He is thought to be a wonderful man, virtuous and honest and good. She's married him. Not supposed to do that. The king is furious. The queen is most unhappy. Um, so what has happened is the king, and you get this kind of thing with Shakespeare, the cranky old father exerting some rule on his daughter. You've got Juliet, and you've got Desdemona, and you've got a number of women in Shakespeare's. You've got Portia, right, being the strong woman. You've got these strong women in Shakespeare's plays, and Imogen is one. So she has been confined to her very special, you can imagine, quarters. It's not a hardship, but she is incarcerated. And Posthumus, her intended, his name is Posthumus Leonatus. Posthumus has had to flee, and he's gone, surprise, surprise, it makes the plot work, to Rome to hide out from his father in law. So he chooses to find protection by exiling himself from the country. So now, this suits the queen. You won't like her. You will not like her. This suits the queen down to a T because she has this one son, Cloten. Now think of that name. You ever been called a Clot or a Claude? That's Claughton. And anyway, but she's got plans. So if Imogen now has been rid of her husband, she may be in some way available to her stepbrother, no blood relation, in order to consolidate the kingship on him. Um, this nameless queen, as I could just read here, is has schemes for the wedding of her brutish and stupid son Claughton and to the incarcerated Imogen. The queen's conniving ambition would have her idiot boy in the throne validated by marrying Imogen the princess, the only heir apparent at the time. What can Imogen do? She's caught in the thickets. Her husband has disappeared. She's incarcerated. Her father is furious. Could there be an annulment? Could there be whatever? I mean, it's essentially a Catholic or high Anglican country at the time. So divorce, we'll see. So the newlywed couple is torn apart, therefore, with Imogen being kept at home. Um, so we know that the plot is basically the beginning and the end, centered around the refusal to pay the tribute and the conflict with Rome. Um, Imogen is caught, and now Claughton is got designs on her. The mother wants this to happen, and she would be the mother of the queen, and that would work out for those rather nasty people, and Imogen would be sacrificed to their aims and desires. The queen and Claughton are two-dimensional characters. Imogen is not so much, Possum is not, but they are two-dimensional. The queen is evil smart, and Claughton is evil stupid. You'll see. It's burlesque. Um, so what does Possumus do? He runs to the so-called enemy, and he's hiding out in Rome. The Rome would seem to be more a Renaissance Rome than a classical Rome, but there he is. He's caught. He can't come home, and it's Imogen does add a rather important note here. She says, as she pines in her confinement, or ere I could give him that parting kiss which I had set betwixt two charming words, comes in my father, and like a tyrannous breathing of the north, shakes all our buds from growing. Shakes all our buds from growing. No growth there. She's still a virgin. This works for the queen. Easier to annul. Right. We get a summary from the minor characters. There are two gentlemen. Now, often in Shakespeare's play, think of the porter in Macbeth. Often Shakespeare, or the gravedigger in Hamlet, you often get characters, and it's all through his plays, characters suggesting the debt they have to the Greek chorus, who comment on the action and even at times move it along. So we have the two gentlemen, and this will happen again. One gentleman says, summary, his daughter and the heir of his kingdom, who he purposed to his wife's sole son. Cymbeline also agreed that Claude should marry Imogen. Really, sometimes these fathers are not painted as very, very nice guys. He purposed to his wife's sole son, a widow that late he married, hath referred herself unto a poor, referred herself, she married him, a poor but worthy gentleman. Worthy gentleman. She's wedded, her husband banished, she imprisoned. There's the summary. Now we get a little picture of this son of the queen. I was going to say something else, but I won't. The son of the queen. The second gentleman comments on Claughton. He, that's Claughton, that hath missed the princess is a thing too bad for bad report. and that he hath her, I mean that married her, that's posthumous, alack, good man, and therefore banished, is a creature such as to seek through the regions of the earth for one is like, there would be something failing in him that should compare. He is incomparable. So there's a testimony to his moral character. I do not think so fair an outward and such stuff within endows a man but he. So he's really built up by these neutral observers. So there's character development. If you're, if I were teaching in the English class, I would say character development, minor characters, and all that. So there you have it. Cymbeline is a bit foolish and tyrannical. Claughton is stupid and brutal and reviled. Imogen, the pure and the tragic, and Posthumus, the incomparably good and exiled. The queen, right, we don't like her either. As a minor character says later in the play, simply put, and this is a quote, I do not like her. Very simply put. So there's another plot that must carry on in parallel, by the way. And this you go to a new space. It's in the hills and the wilds of Wales. And it's even pastoral. Rousseau would love it. It's pastoral. It's a fantasy. For it takes ahistorical characters and elevates them into the main plot. They're not real. They create a nationalist resolution towards the end. They're very useful in terms of the plot development. In Wales, there's a fellow by the name of Belarius, who is probably about the age of the king, or maybe a little bit younger. And he has two boys with him who are now, I don't know, early 20s. Um, Belarius, the older gentleman, and the two boys, Guiderius and Arviragus, are living there. They have assumed names in Wales. They're living incognito. Nobody knows really who they are. Belarius had been Cymbeline's highly placed favorite in the court, but he was falsely accused by someone, and he was exiled. Cymbeline seems to make a lot of mistakes. Cymbeline says, "Get out of my court, get out of my country." So off he goes to Wales, but he has a rather nasty plan. He kidnaps the two boys. Imogen isn't born yet. He kidnaps the two boys, takes them to this liminal space called Wales, this empty world, where he starts again in pastoral innocence with these boys, and raises them, and they think Belarius is the dad. And of course he's not, it's Cymbeline. So he's accused and banished. He's committed a rather nasty action of abducting the children, it's kidnapping, and then living totally apart from the court where nobody can find him. I would call that a sin. However, and a rather bitter one. However, so he says about himself, he recounts his plight to his adoptive sons, so called. My fault being nothing, as I have told you oft, but that two villains, and this is his story, whose false oaths prevailed before my perfect honor, I was innocent, swore to Cymbeline I was confederate with the Romans. So followed my banishment. Cymbeline, get out of here. It's like Lear with Duke of Kent. And his 20 years, so followed my banishment, and this 20 years, this rock and these domains have been my world, where I have lived at honest freedom, paid more pious debts to heaven than in all the forend of my time. What pious debts do we have? These boys don't know who their father is. They're paying a price. So he has a natural life, and he is given to prayer and asks for forgiveness. He's recovering, but the problem isn't recovered yet. You can be sure that it will be. This is a comedy. So the nobleman, and he's done this before, Shakespeare. The nobleman becomes spiritual in pastoral nature. Although initially for revenge, he had abducted the king's two sons from Cymbeline's former marriage and raised them in the misty mountains of Wales. Belarius, now Morgan, is raising the two boys as his own. Um, he doesn't miss, and this is Shakespeare comment, a little satirical, commenting on the civilized in air quotes, the civilized world of the court. And he says, as Belarius disparages it, he's now, of course, living in total innocence. Did you but know the city's usuries, and usury was, of course, a sin in those days, was wrong and illegal, usuries, and felt them knowingly. The art of the court, as hard to leave as keep. You had to play the game, and it was hard to get away. Whose top to climb is certain falling. Pride goeth before a fall, right? The higher you go, the further it is down. Or so slippery that the fear's as bad as falling, even you can never sleep o' nights. The toil of the war, a pain that only seems to seek out danger in the name of fame and honor, which dies in the search, and hath as oft a slanderous epitaph as record of fair act. It were all about war and the lies that were told about it. Could be said today, I think. But that's Shakespeare, isn't it? Commenting on all time. So the plot becomes fantastic using whales, whales will become this more so. Um, that liminal space where anything can happen. And you get that, of course, in other plays, such as Midsummer Night's Dream, they go to the fairyland. As You Like It, you get Forest of Arden. You get, Macbeth and the Heath, right? Where the rules don't apply. And so that's where they are. They're in this liminal space that is open to anything, and anything can happen, and pretty much does. So, um, where are we now? Oh, yes. The Claughton, again, would be the husband of Imogen, but he'll have a bit of a difficulty because Imogen will flee to Wales, where all the characters will go to Wales, of course. Now, the the Queen you'll have to see really as almost a Disney-esque. And so the same with Claughton. It's almost Disney-esque. She's so two-dimensional. She's there to move the plot along, and she isn't developed much herself. Um, let's take a look at Posthumus in Rome. He's exiled to Rome, and he finds himself in confrontation with a Roman named Iachimo. And Iachimo is testing him on the fidelity of women. Misogynist, but he's saying, and beginning in a second subplot, I don't trust women. They're all fallible, is a polite word. And also, I don't trust your wife, Imogen. So he says, he brags, he can seduce her if he had the chance, and they'd all fall. Pretty ugly. So he says, this is Act 1, Scene 4, 106 to 109, with 5 times so much conversation, I should get ground, perhaps lay her on the ground, and to be specific, your fair mistress may make her go back even to the yielding, had I admittance and opportunity to friend. Well, Posthum is absolutely outraged. Absolutely not. You would never, never, never uh, gain this terrible advantage with my wife. As a matter of fact, so he bets on it. Now, there is an odd thing. Who would even speak to Yakumo after that? Never mind betting or wagering on your good wife. Strange. Male pride? I don't know. But he does. Anyway, he got to advance the plot, and there you go. So he bites. So let's to lay this down, to set this up. You would go have to go back to Britain just before he left. They give each other things. The Imogen gives Posthumus a ring which he wears, and Posthumus gives Imogen a bracelet which she puts on. So both have these tokens from each other. So Posthumous now will gamble the ring, and there's money involved, whatever, that Yakumo, you can't do this. Right? So it goes on. Yakumo, in his absolute confidence in his power with Imogen, because he trusts women so terribly, um, he goes to Britain and he goes to Imogen's apartment and tries to seduce her, and she abruptly rejects him. You know, creep. So he changes course totally and says, "Oh no, I was just testing, and I know how loyal you are, and I can give you a good report, whatever." So he says, "How does he win?" Covering his ugly manners with yet another lie and more ooze, he gets leave to park his valuable trunk. Oh, do me a favor, Imogen. I have a trunk with some valuables, and I'm really worried about the contents. So could I leave it in your private quarters, which is well guarded? So she, being the sweet lady that she is, does him the favor, and she actually believed him. He is a silver-tongued devil. Believes him that yes, this is the trunk that I can take care of for you. So what does he do? The trunk arrives. He's not there visible. He is there. He's in the trunk. So when she goes to bed and goes to sleep, out he pops. He takes note of all the decoration and wall hangings and what have you, the details of the room. He's been there. Then he notices that she's wearing a bracelet. He managed without waking her to take the bracelet, and also notices when he takes the bracelet, she has a particular mark on her body, a birthmark, whatever, in a place that would be, and of course, in those days, covered. Back he goes and presents all this to Posthumus, and Posthumus is convinced he did. So he doesn't just die of horror or anything. He gets absolutely outraged and angry, turns against all women. There's a long speeches, right, of his reviling of all women and particularly Imogen. And as he says, I would kill her before her father. He says, this is Act 2, Scene 4, line 147. Oh, that I had her here to tear her limb meal. I will go there and do it in the court before her father. I'll do something. Right. There's something very ignoble, and this idea of nobility and nobility of birth as a virtue itself goes to the sort of metaphysical structure of the moral order of the universe. I have a lecture on that, by the way. If you go to the moral order of nature, David Gamble, Shakespeare, there's that's fully developed. But you see, God was up and grace came down. It went through the divine right of kings and then through the royal family, nobility, gentlemen, down to the serfs, who were basically cannon fodder for their wars or else agricultural workers. Um, so Posthumous comes from that sort of common man class. So he's not quite up there. He shouldn't really be with Imogen if you look at that whole pyramidal structure, but we'll take care of that later. Okay, so he lacks nobility of birth, but he's a good man. And he's morally outraged, and you would be. So, but who would give such a slimy ooze like Giacomo the time of day? But he does. And that's the plot. So, this is in contrast to Belarius and the two boys. In contrast, and Belarius comments on the two boys, and because they are not only are they good and valiant and noble and virtuous and all those things being raised in nature by the good man, but also they have nobility of birth, and somehow it's a trait. Of course, Shakespeare is writing for the nobility, and it's not a bad idea to include that. So he says, um, the boys belong in their proper place. The restitution of their proper place will be right, natural, and good, for they have innocence and nobility. Belarius states the hierarchical bias simply, and this is Act 3, Scene 3, line 82. They think they are mine, and though trained up meanly, very modestly in Wales, in the cave wherein they bow, their thoughts do hit the roofs of palaces. And nature prompts them in simple and low things to prince it much beyond the trick of others. They prince it above their surroundings. They are princes. And in their response or attitudes or their doings, they show a nobility not only from the innocence of their background, but the innocence and the rightness of their birth. So Posthumous doesn't have that rightness of birth, but don't worry. So they have received this sort of trickle down beatification. Um, to go on, to advance the plot. Now, what are we going to do about advancing the plot? There are letters. A letter is often a device, right? It's used in Macbeth. It's used in Hamlet. It's used often. To advance the plot, the author engages with the use of letters. So Posthumous, as having heard of this terrible thing happening, and of course it's not true, sends two letters. He wants to get Imogen out in a situation where she can be dealt with. So he sends her a letter and says, how I love you, darling, and how I love you, darling, and how I love you, darling. And she says, oh, I must fly to him, and I'm going. So please come to Milford Haven in Wales, he says. And she said, oh, I should be able to fly there in a moment. I mean, a horse and cart would take a week, but I should be able to and be with him. She falls for the love again. And Bassanio, who is her servant, her gentleman servant, he gets a letter which simply says, kill her. Ooh. So she talks about the wings of interesting contrast, right? The dramatic tension is palpable. So she says, if one of mean affairs, they have a horse and cart, if one of mean affairs may plot it in a week, why may not I glide thither in a day on the wings of love? And by the way, tell me how Wales was made so happy as to inherit such a haven where Posthumous is going to be, because she's so crazy about him. That's Act 3, Scene 2, line 50. So she wishes to be carried the wings of love. Posthumous gets this letter to say, kill her. Now, it's interesting. Shakespeare is now giving it a little bit of moral gravitas. So I'm your commander, and I ask you to commit a war crime. What does Nuremberg say? It says, it's no excuse. And this goes right back to the Holocaust and the horrible crimes perpetrated on anybody but the Aryan. And to participate in that, you are not forgiven. That is, you're not exempt from justice. As you know, the Nuremberg trials went through a lot of these characters. He says in this moral dilemma, and this I think this is really really foresightful of Shakespeare, but what else is new? That I should murder her upon the love and truth and vows which I have made to thy command? I, her blood. If it be so to do good service, never let me count it serviceable. How look I that I should seem to lack humanity so much as this fact comes to? He says, no, I'm not going to do it. I will betray my master before I betray my humanity. Oh, would it were so more often. After such an interior debate, in his grim quandary, he chooses humanity defined by love, giving some moral gravitas to this feisty comedy. To sum up the narratives, okay, let's have a little review. The play is going to get more complex. I just want to make sure we are where we are, so to speak. So, oh yes, we got the Roman tribute issue, right? That's we haven't dealt with that exactly, um, but Posthumus will be coming with the Roman troops, right? They are going to come and collect what is they think is due to them. The romance of Imogen has been intensified by the letters. Um, and Cloten is plotting to replace Posthumus, right? That he will take over, and I'll read more later just how hideous his imagination goes. He's worse than Giacomo, lots. So the repulsive queen, the repulsive son are plotting. He will go to Wales. So a major the revenge tragedy then is this fiendish plot of Posthumus to use Pisanio, the servant, to kill Imogen in a totally vengeful act. And as at the end of the Tempest, the rarer action is in virtue than in vengeance, Prospero says. And Shakespeare often moralizes on forgiveness and mercy. So we also have the two long lost sons who think they're the sons of Belarius and are sons of Cymbeline and have been raised in honesty and virtue. While the penitent Belarius, still feeling the guilt, because he's a good man, the guilt of kidnapping the two boys and taking them away from the rightful place. And he attests to his pious debts to heaven through prayer because of his act of vengeance. Isn't it a biblical vengeance is mine, saith the Lord? Cymbeline, through these characters, becomes a bit of a morality play. And he confesses, Belarius confesses, O Cymbeline, heaven and my conscience knows thou didst unjustly banish me, whereon at 3 and 2 years old I stole these babes, thinking to bar thee of succession, to stop your line. Now he does have Imogen later, but he doesn't. Belarius doesn't know about that. As thou refst me of my lands, I got you back. Act 3, Scene 3, line 99. So the only thing that can be resolved is by restitution and forgiveness. To contemplate the plot, underlying Imogen's dilemma is another threat. Yes, Pisanio has been given a potion, and the queen has given him this poison to give to Imogen. We bring in another minor character. His name is Cornelius, and he is the drugstore owner, the apothecary. And he says about the queen, I do not like her. So what he does is, she says, oh, I want to kill some annoying cats and rats and what have you with this poison. But he suspects her. I guess the court is gossiping away about how, what her plans might be, and they don't like her. So what he does is he takes that little draft of poison and replaces it with, I don't know, a sleeping potion of some kind, phenobarbital. I have no idea. And what it will do is give Imogen a nice long sleep, and she'll awake refreshed. So Pisanio will not be giving the poison to Imogen. He'll be giving this. And at the time, it's very important that Imogen lie down and go to sleep, because then something else happens. So it's complexity on complexity. You'll see. So the drug is harmless, and will be useful in order to create a little gap whereby, fittingly, Imogen will sleep so that something else can happen. You'll see. So 3 cheers for Cornelius for having saved the day with the restorative draft rather than the poison draft. So, rushing to Wales, Imogen goes as a peasant woman. And it's interesting, in these places, these liminal spaces, people often lose their worldly status. Look at Edgar on the heath, the unaccommodated man. The Duke of Kent in Lear, is a commoner in common clothes. So they often they lose this hierarchy, and they're out in nature as their natural self. So she goes simply as a woman, an ordinary woman. Um, so in order to meet her confused husband, now she wants to get to the Romans. So what Pisanio does is provide her with some boys' clothes. Here we go, Shakespeare. The boys are playing girls, then playing boys. Um, and she puts on these boys' clothes to disguise herself as Fidele. Fidele, of course, is Latinate for faithful. So she's now dressed as a young boy. She, as coincidence, and her object is to go and meet the Romans and find Posthumus. So she ends up in the same area, don't you know, as Belarius and the boys. So she meets them, and it's almost preternatural. They're so bonded, even more bonded than just meeting nice strangers and having a coffee with them. They are bonded, right? So they're totally connected with this unseen force of family and nobility of birth together, holding them together. And anyway, there's lots of speeches about brotherly love and what have you. And in the background, here comes Cloten. And what he's done, he's dressed himself in Posthumus' clothes. Well, he travels to Wales disguised in Posthumus' clothing provided by Pisanio, which he had to do, as the development of the Queen's plot grows. Queen has plotted her husband Cymbeline's death, we find out. Oh, she really is something else. She is the Wicked Witch of the West. And then sends Cloten, that clumsy malevolence, to find Imogen, whose death or dishonor will satisfy the vicious plans of her Majesty. Cloten plots. Gone she is to death or dishonor, and my end can make use of either. She being down, subdued, or dead, I have the placing of the British crown. Act 3, Scene 5, line 62. He, obedient to mother, follows with a confused, dastardly, brutish plot, disguised as Posthumus. And listen to this one. With that suit of clothing, upon my back, I will ravish, he will rape her. First kill him, he thinks rather, and in her eyes, I'll kill in my, right. There she shall see my valor. Oh, my toxic masculinity will just, speak such wonderful volumes about me. Shall see my valor, which will then be a torment to her contempt. To the court, I'll knock her back, put her home. Again, she hath despised me rejoicingly, and I'll be merry in my revenge. Act 3, Scene 5, 137, and on. Somehow he thinks his toxic masculinity is a virtue. Well, there's a reversal of a natural order. So he, however, does run into the brothers. They don't like him. To put it simply, they kill him. No, there's not much grief. They cut his head off and they send it downriver. But they have the body with posthumous clothing. Can you see something coming? So they chop off his head and send it downstream. Then they return to the cave where Imogen is, and she is sleeping. She's had the draft. All right. I should have said it earlier, but she had the draft. She's asleep. They place Claughton's body in posthumous clothes beside her. Can you see what's coming? And then they go off and wail the demise of their wonderful guest. They think she's dead. They think she's dead. We know she's not. Dramatic irony works. After intense expressions of sorrow by these pure gentlemen, they lay her body in the cave, then retrieve the headless cotton dress and posthumous clothes and place the corpse beside her. What? Confusion, identity, disguises, it goes on. It's so Shakespearean. Imogen wakes up. Yep, guess what? She thinks it's posthumous. She smears Claughton blood on her face and she mourns as Ted rolls and passes out. So she's gone again. But when she wakes up, it's Lucius the Roman. Lucius the Roman finds her. So here she is dressed as Fidele. She wakes up to the Roman. She wanted to go to the Romans in the first place to find Posthumus. So the main plot of the plots, they intersect again in Roman company for safety. Imogen lies to the Roman, gives a false identity. Praise God, please God, forgive me for lying. But, it's a question of the higher good. And so she stays with them. So let's summarize to this point. The plot is coming full circle. And if we return, for Imogen is safely ensconced with the Romans, we return to Cymbeline's court, where he is desperate for the loss of Imogen and despairing for the life of his queen, who is near unto death, searches her out for Claughton. Elements of the plot are confused as ever. Posthumus is deceived about Imogen's being alive, and now she's with the Romans where he is. Claughton's end is unknown. We don't know where he is, say they in court. Pisanio is unsure of his security, right? He has disobeyed his master, and yet he's not killed her, but the master wants her to. So he thinks he's in deep trouble. The Romans have landed in Wales, don't you know? In Wales, in Britain, and are getting closer. Pisanio the servant, at this point, what a mess. How do you work this out? There's been no news from Wales. Nobody knows. Confusion reigns supreme before the restitution of order. This is a comedy. Pisanio says, I heard no letter from my master since I wrote him. He lied. Another wrong he's done, so to speak. I wrote him Imogen was slain. I did it, master. And there she's roaming around as Fidele. 'Tis strange, now hear I from my mistress, who did promise to yield me off tidings. He doesn't hear from Imogen. I don't know where she is. Neither know I what has betid to Claughton. Well, we know that. But remain perplexed in all. Here you have the common man speaking a summary like the gentleman. It's standard. The heavens still must work. Fortune brings in some boats that are not steered. In other words, we have to leave it to the fates. Chance, hazard. Ironically, Imogen and Posthumus are well and disguised. Claughton will never be seen again. The good servant Pisanio ends with trusting in chance and the currents of time. We're getting closer to resolution. So, the guilt-ridden Posthumus, now having joined the Roman army, is traveling with Iachimo in the Roman army towards Britain. However, Posthumus switches to the disguise of a loyal British peasant. Oh, good. The good guys will out, right? Upon landing, and he goes to battle with the Britons as a dutiful Briton. Okay, here's the English stock coming through the fore, Your Majesty James I. However, he does seek death, but he's so befuddled and confused and hopelessly anguished that he says, "I'd rather die. I will do what I can for Britain, and I will give my life for Britain." A little more nationalism there. Coincidentally, nothing new here. Coincidentally, he ties up with the two princes as they rescue the beleaguered Cymbeline from defeat. So you now got the valiant Britons saving the day, beating the Romans through Belarius, the two boys, and Posthumus. Four of them. This is right out of the Marvel comic, right? This is the superheroes, not new. So in Marvel comic form, they save the day. At that point, Posthumus, still riddled with terrible guilt, would rather go back into prison with the Romans because Cymbeline, of course, now has the day where he can assign sentences to the Romans and to his enemies. He goes back to become a Roman in disguise. As a disguised Roman. Um, Imogen is with the same group, right, as Fidele, and she's captured and imprisoned as well. The newlyweds in disguise do not know each other. Now, what are you going to do? Okay, remember we talked about the boys having noble birth? Posthumus has a noble character, but he doesn't have the noble birth. You got to do something about that if we're going to legitimize this marriage. So what he does, Shakespeare, and he does this in a number of plays, he uses the supernatural. He does it with the witches. He does it with, you seem to be women, but your beards forbid me to interpret that you are so, kind of thing, and all this confusion on the he. You get the confusion here. So um, we bring in the great god Jupiter. Why deal with the lesser Jupiter with the ghosts of the spirits, I should say, the spirits of Posthumus Leonatus. His father's name was Leonatus. So Posthumus is after the death of Leonatus, posthumous name. Um, they bring in the parents, and Jupiter anoints. You can read the long speeches or listen to them. He anoints and elevates Posthumus to noble status. Done. Isn't that clever? So, thereby giving noble status to the commoner from father of the gods. It can't get better. Now a noble to be husband of the royal princess and brother-in-law to the princes, satisfying the divinely ordained class system of the day. Margaret Thatcher would say there is no alternative. So the Jacobean sense of hierarchy, which really is, it must be a step, because James is now the king of England, and they used to be, Scotland and England had been at war and various things, right? Elizabeth chopped his mother's head off, etc. So he's pulling this together. Shakespeare doing a darn good job of pulling it all together, that these Britons are sanctified by Jupiter himself. And of course, you're getting that, it's sort of back to classical to bring all that knowledge forward into create Renaissance England or Renaissance Europe. So now the princess now can conjoin with her lowborn but divinely elevated husband with equanimity. Cymbeline calls his court around. First, Cornelius, the empathetic apothecary, announces the queen's death, who before her last breath has confessed to all her misdemeanors and sins and what have you. So that we've cleared the deck there. And then he admits that he switched the draft to a harmless sedative, if you will. Cymbeline has some executions to do with the Romans, but he recognized the virtue of Imogen. And again, you have that sort of almost preternatural, I feel a bond with you. Well, it's his daughter. And so there is no execution for Fideli. Um, Fideli then, still as the boy, notices a ring on Yacomo's finger. I says, "What's that doing there?" Yacomo, now it's his turn for confession, which he does. And we don't like him, but we don't, at that point, you don't really want him to. He confesses, he repents, and does all that stuff. Well, if you go to confession, that's a good thing. So he admits to the ugly, ugly wager, and Posthumous steps forward and reveals all, including the dastardly plot to kill Imogen by his manservant, etc. Imogen, as Fideli says, this is Posthumous. Remember, he's in disguise as a Roman. She jumps forward and practically tackles him. Well, he's not used to being attacked by a peasant boy, so he throws him aside, but it's not him, it's her, and it all comes out. So that's a cue for another secondary character, Pisanio, to jump in and tell all his story. It's all coming out in the wash. The death of Claudius disturbs Cymbeline, but Belarius jumps in with his story and says, "Oh, but guess what? Um, you now have two sons." Wow. Uh, Pisanio then admits that to what he has done and not killed Imogen, etc. So Pisanio's out in the open, Iacomo's out in the open, Imogen's out in the open, Posthumus is out in the open. It's all coming together. And Belarius, of course, reveals you've got two boys, so you now have three kids. You thought you had lost them all. Um, So you have everything, of course, coming together and being resolved, forgiven, and the forgiveness is very important, of course, at the end of Shakespeare's plays. Belarius is in limbo, and the captured Romans tell the sort of Cymbeline over their head. However, the king pardons them all and says, "I will pay you some tribute." But it's not, if you like, a demeaning of the Britons because he's chosen to do it when he didn't have to, as generosity. Perhaps this is a Renaissance thing to the classical debt. He pays tribute to the classical debt that Renaissance England is profiting so much for, but I'm kind of making that up. Right on. And then Lucius Soothsayer, and they were very superstitious times. And this, I have to say, King James was a very learned man. He wrote. He was in architecture. He wrote actually. Well, the King James Bible. Right. He was very committed, but he also wrote a text on demonology, which really worked for Macbeth, which is written, oh God, 1606, I think 1606, which really works because they did believe in these spirits, right? And the king was an expert. So we now have a happy Britain. The soothsayer has said, all is well, and we have a happy ending. That's nice. So the queen is to blame for the skullduggery about the tribute. She's dead. She got her comeuppance or downance or whatever it was. And there is rapturous joy celebrated. So to sum up the whole show, Posthumus is ennobled by the visitation of Jupiter to be worthy. Posthumus and Imogen are reunited after his elevation, right? Posthumus and Imogen forgive the repentant Iachimo, who confesses in profound contrition. Belarius, Guiderius, Arviragus are recognized and welcomed in their true identities. Cymbeline has his children back. Belarius, of course, is forgiven. Cymbeline is freed from the clutches of his evil, conniving wife, who is conveniently dead. Claudius is dead. There's not much grief there. In a gesture of goodwill, Cymbeline releases the Roman prisoners and agrees to resume the paying of tribute. Cymbeline has his male heir, which I think is Guiderius. The gods predict happiness and joy for Britain. There's a growing sense of Jacobean national unity, which is satisfied. And so all these twistings and turnings rely on plot devices and dramatic ironies. Rings, bracelets, letters, mistaken identity, a series of disguises. Some people have two disguises, and a trip to the illimitable land of Wales, where all these machinations of the previous court are worked out. So much of this is standard fare for Shakespeare, and it comes together in an enormous play. It's Shakespeare's second longest play after Hamlet. And it's a complex thing, and it's melodrama at its finest, and a lot of it is so hyperbolic, you might almost consider it burlesque. I think Claughton is certainly a burlesque of the nasty character, but it's melodrama and it's fun. And I suggest that you go and see it if you possibly can. It's on in Stratford, Ontario, in Canada, this summer, and that's actually one of the reasons I'll be doing this in my condo to the people who are interested in going to the play, or anyone for that matter. So I hope you enjoy the lecture. I hope you continue to enjoy the following lectures on the literature that I've developed and will continue to develop. I trust they will serve your understanding as theater goers. If you enjoyed the presentation, please hit the like button and check out other installments in the series. You can simply type in David Gamble, the title of the author, and the title of the work. And I hope you enjoy further. Thank you, and good night to all.